Chapter 18. Those of the Wolves. Cyrus. Part 2. I suddenly choked, throat filled with dust and dirt, and I bent over, hacking and coughing, spitting away mouthful after mouthful, seemingly without end. My throat went dry, and I kept hacking, wiping my tongue off to try to swallow without that earthy taste of sediment, and I was on all fours above a growing puddle of saliva on the floor beneath me. Another wave came, and I dry heaved, leaning forward with forehead to the cool wood floors that now creaked and breathed underneath me. Something was coming, rippling with life like 100 floragons, and it had sent the whole world into frenzy. The long dead wood shifted beneath me and searched for life again, yawning cilia sprouting from the wood that reached for nutrients. I threw myself back away, scratching away those alien feelers, pulling my hands into my jacket where they were safer, in the tanned and beaten and somehow still aching hides of the leather. Tristan! I found the strength to gasp as I thrashed back against the wall, still choking. I ran forward into the door, slamming into it head first. The crackling cilia sprouting underneath my feet sent me skyward as I jumped away, trying to get away from him. Anything to get away from. It was alive! On impact with the floor, I threw myself towards the door again, finding it suddenly open, and I stumbled into the dense wall of Tristan's bare chest, careening past him and hitting the floor where I writhed away. He vocalized surprise, but I barely heard him, hacking and coughing out and trying to get to my feet when I jumped into a chair. The cushions there were a little less alive than the floor, but everything was grabbing for me. Everything was... I clutched into a fetal position, gasping for breath, trying to avoid the floor and the life and the... The smoky air in the room was a pleasant numb. It was less hungry to return to life. I coughed out the dirt onto the floor again, stealing breath between spitting to get that soil from my mouth, and finally felt it start to clear. Underneath the smoke there was an overpowering smell of beer and bodies, but that was anything preferable to how it felt out in the hallway. My breath started to return, and I found Ava and Tristan both muttering to one another as they quickly redressed, each checking the other over. They straightened cloaks, adjusted shirts, reassembled ponytails and beards, all interspersed with concerned glances towards me. I began to take deeper breaths, in and out, steadying my heart beating, but then I tasted soil again, like it was being shoved into my mouth. I jumped up to my feet and headed for the nearest window to jump out to leap away, but I was slower now, clumsy, head buzzing from the smoke. I breathed something in, and I was dizzy. Tristan caught me before I reached the bed, grabbing me by the scruff of the neck and turning me around. "Drink," he said, shoving a flask towards my mouth. It was no more an offer than the wolves had requested Bram's jerky. I could smell the liquor as it approached, and held my breath, tipping back the flask and chucking it as fast as I could. There was a split moment's delay as the concoction hit my throat, setting it ablaze after 2 swallows, and then the third mouthful shot back up my nose, setting that on fire as well. Tristan snatched the flask away from me as I fell into another coughing fit, and then offered it again as I got myself under control. "That help?" he asked. I almost yelled at him that no, it hadn't helped, just made me about ready to throw up, but as my head quickly began to swim, and things grew hazier, I noticed that actually it had. The dirt didn't feel like it was in my mouth anymore. The floor didn't seem like it was reaching for me just as bad, and my jacket didn't tighten around my chest anymore, trying to draw breath again. I looked towards the wood, finding that there weren't actually any cilia sprouting there, no little tendrils reaching to infest me. I caught myself and nodded to him, sleepily. "Good," he said, tossing me the whole flask and heading towards the door. Drink that shit as fast as you can. It won't get better. Wait, Tristan, I said, but Ava had followed him out and they closed the door behind him. He was right. The walls, the floors, they were coming alive again. Whatever it was still coming towards us. I shriveled up away from the floor and, picking up my chair, ran towards the corner next to the bed, shrinking into the remnants of the physical odors in the air, which were the lesser of the two sensations. That made things a little better, but I could still feel the room around me coming to life, and I threw open the flask again, gulping down another mouthful and then a second. This time I kept the fire down, fighting it all the way to the stomach where the heat spread, out into my chest and my shoulders, bringing a much better set of feelings. I looked down at the floor. There were things coming for me, but the order of it was all out of place. How had I gotten here again? What was I doing? I settled back against the wall, lifting up the little drink to my lips and downing another gulp from the flask, and then another. Another little fireball hit my stomach and detonated, putting me in an even better place, where I could barely feel my toes, much less the fact that the floor was still definitely coming to get me. I burped, and then I laughed. A stupid, drunk laugh.
Cyrus, in the flask.
Yeah, obviously there's something in it, I chuckled. That's why it tastes so good, silly.
It's not just liquor.
I ignored him and drank another gulp, kicking back and closing my eyes. Now it was like I was floating in empty space, suspended far from the world in a sort of vast vacancy. Before, it had been a big flood of color, and that had been annoying. I chuckled again. This was weird. I reached out. There really was nothing. Nothing out beyond me in the room, nothing in the hallways, in the woods. Just a nice little empty storm. Even wrapped in the cocoon of my intoxication, I sensed a terrible light, rippling through the currents of the world. Those rhythms of life, they had a tendency to gather towards each other, swirling in lees and eddies like the water. And now, they circled a vast maelstrom. I opened my eyes, but the room around me was dim, and I could barely move from where I slumped. My body was refusing to obey me. It won't get better, Tristan had said. That force was still coming. The storm, it was almost here. Snapping my eyes open, I began to force the hand that held the liquor towards my lips, ever so slowly, ever so slightly. It was a lot of effort, but with titanic strength I got it closer to my face, shaking violently and spilling a few precious drops in my exertion. The storm, it was here. If I'd been paying any attention, I would have noticed the utter silence beyond the door, where the wolves and their masters had stopped their party dead. It was all that I could do to continue lifting that flask towards my lips, bracing against visions of hunger and drought and the feast, of life and death and cyclical seasons of rise and fall, of terrifyingly beautiful growth and decay. It was like the raw force of nature itself was battering me, threatening to tear me apart, consume me alive. I almost had the flask to my lips when suddenly I was punched in the chest and the ears and the eyes and the nose by a crushing pressure. I was knocked from the chair to the floor, spilling liquor all over myself, and I slammed there, eyes glazing and teeth shaking, throat closing up and chest refusing, unable to raise up, even to scream. That storm had ripped out of that ethereal world of energies and rhythms and torn its way into the physical one, in the form of a sound like the howl of nature itself. It shook the ground beneath me, crushed me to the floor, whited my eyes, and drunk on the spiked liquor, all I could do was try to raise my hands to my bleeding ears to protect what remained of my eardrums. The crying out of hundreds of other voices joined that storm, and the liquor peaked and my blood ran thin, and then the rest became a blurred blend of images and feelings. The echoing howls eventually grew silent. I was sure of that, but the storm continued. Then the storm was close to me, growing nearer. Then it was on me. There was light, and I heard a sound like distant thunder, and then other rumblings. And in a moment that I nearly confused with death, the storm faded away, disappearing like it had never been there. With another sound like distant thunder, there were hands all around me, and then I was lifted up and carried away.